Also, the Russian invaders attacked Kostiantynivka once again the day before. At least 4 people have died. This was reported by the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, Vadim Filashkin. I will quote, "The city was subjected to 4 airstrikes and shelling from artillery. Currently, there are reports of 2 deceased men, Odias, and 2 women. According to Filashkin, 7 private houses, 4 apartment buildings and dormitories have been damaged. An infrastructure facility, 2 businesses, 3 power lines, a gas pipeline, 7 garages, and 3 cars. And what is happening right now in the areas of Kleshevka and Andreevka will be told by military correspondent Andrei Tsaplenko.
It's already clear that the Russians are struggling to take Kostiantynivka, as the military calls it. The 93rd Brigade has been holding the enemy at the line of Kleshevka and Andreevka for several months now. Right now, all directions in Kleshevka and Andreevka are primarily focused on infantry, and we've been told that this paladin is preparing to fire towards Russia. Cluster munitions.
Well, they're not huge, but when they hit, you think, thank God, and it's good if they take out more of them in batches.
They hit the squad and took out 3.
On the front line in this area, the Russians have virtually no equipment. Everything big and powerful is hidden and camouflaged in the rear. However, that doesn't mean the 93rd Brigade can't reach there. But before making a shot, you need to see where to hit.
Plus, we're tightening the catapult.
And so this nightbird called Shark quietly searches for Russian targets. Sometimes it's tens of kilometers deep behind the front line. And when it moves there, something more powerful inevitably comes in.
We're operating at a depth of about 50 kilometers. In recent days, tanks, bunkers with bombers, enemy wings that were successfully destroyed.
Ukrainian-made drones Shark are used to adjust strikes on Russian rear positions with long-range Western equipment, artillery, HIMARS systems and aircraft that drop precision bombs. This entire arsenal barely holds back the Russian invasion, and for now, there's no guarantee that it will be replenished with a new American president.
I have no idea how it all might end. I know that we will continue to serve until this is all over. We still have that kind of strength for this.
Everyone understands that the war will continue. To say that someone is expecting something there, well, probably not.
It's impossible to find a compromise when Putin is fundamentally unhappy with the existence of Ukraine. And sitting in the Oval Office, it's harder to understand than in a trench under Toretsko-Kleshivka.
And also this week, the Russians carried out a barbaric attack on the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They hit the shelter protecting reactor number 4 of the nuclear plant directly with a drone carrying an explosive charge. A fire broke out. Rescuers found several areas of damage. All the fires have been extinguished. There is no open flame. But let's be honest, this is a real terrorist threat. After all, the shelter is our state. It was built with other countries in Europe and America to save humanity from radiation. And the only ones who can attack and occupy such facilities despite the possible consequences are indeed the Russian war criminals. KTSN correspondent Natalia Nagornaya has already been able to see the aftermath of the strike on the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Her exclusive footage follows.
Russia has once again shown itself as a nuclear terrorist state. A Russian drone with an explosive charge, it's now confirmed that it was indeed this drone, struck the shelter over the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and caused damage to it. The surveillance cameras show that this happened just after 2 o'clock in the morning. Another explosion over the reactor? In the footage, you can clearly see the fire, and in the morning, smoke was rising from the hole in the protective shelter. And once again, firefighters had to extinguish the fire over reactor number 4.
The insulation between the metal continues to smolder. It needs to be completely extinguished. In order to reach it without completely destroying it, they are making small holes in the sarcophagus under difficult conditions. You can see the very harsh weather conditions for working at height. They are complicated and some safety measures are being violated, but it needs to be done.
Right now it looks like this. You see these tiny dots. In fact, these are the people who are repairing the huge hole, possibly from the ground. This hole is even impossible to assess. Right now, dozens of my colleagues from various media outlets have gathered here to showcase this act of nuclear terrorism that Russia has resorted to once again. A fire has broken out in the confinement, and in fact, the State Emergency Service had to extinguish this fire again. But the most important thing that is being said right now is that there is no threat, and there is also no radiation leak.
The consequences could have been catastrophic. If, let's say, the drone had hit about 15 meters to the side of the old shelter, there would have been a radiation accident. At the moment, the situation is under control. No increase in control levels regarding the radiation background at the site has been recorded. The background has not changed.
Russian terrorists
regularly terrorize the Chernobyl zone, but the damage to the sarcophagus, the shelter, has happened for the first time. In total, this hole has an area of about 50 square meters. It might seem like no one in Ukraine would be surprised by a Shahed, but right now, dozens of journalists are filming the very Shahed that flew over the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Here you can see the serial numbers, which we usually don't show, and part of the engine and the remnants of what was once, in fact, a Russian explosive drone. This is one of the fragments of the so-called confinement that fell today after the Shahed flew in. It was built by the whole world, but Russia destroyed it in an instant. This structure was built with the collective efforts of the whole world. This includes Europe, the United States, Canada, and Japan, to protect both nature and people from the dangers of nuclear power. This arch weighs 36,000 tons. It was built and moved. And in our archives, there is a video showing how it covered the previous arch of the shelter, which was built over 206 days right after the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This shelter, which Russia has now damaged, cost more than 2 billion euros. But this investment was necessary to protect the world from radiation. The Chernobyl zone has already experienced several acts of Russian nuclear terrorism, starting actually from 1986, when it was still under Soviet occupation and the explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant occurred. And already during the full-scale invasion, the Chernobyl station was occupied and was under the control of Russian terrorists. 37 days. And if we recall Russian nuclear terrorism in the fall of 2022, they also struck the South Ukraine nuclear power plant. They hit it with a missile, but it fell a few hundred meters short of the station itself. I would also like to remind you that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is currently under the control of the occupiers. And this plant was also shelled by the Russians. We see how Russia continues to pose a threat to the entire world. And a vivid example is right behind me.